Elias had never been to the Andara station before. The station floated like a pearl in the black of space, a hub for countless species, each stranger than the next. The corridors were wide and metallic, lined with glowing panels that changed colors depending on the species passing by. He had heard about it in briefings back on Earth, a place where diplomacy was as much about survival as it was about conversation. And yet, no warning could have prepared him for the moment he first saw her. She sat alone in the corner of the common area, her posture straight, hands resting calmly on her lap. The other aliens seemed to circle around her carefully, like they were moving around a live wire. Some whispered, others stared with wide, fearful eyes. Elias felt the tension before he even recognized it. "Stay away from her," he had been warned by station staff when he checked in. "Whatever you do, don't sit near her. You will regret it." The station was full of exaggerated rumors, after all. But now, standing a few meters away from the table where she waited, he understood. She was different. The other species' reactions confirmed it. She radiated something unseen, something powerful, something that unsettled the room without moving a muscle. Elias looked at her closely. Her skin was pale, almost like ivory, and her eyes glowed faintly under the overhead lights, a soft silver that seemed to study everyone at once. Her hair was long and dark, flowing in a way that seemed to float slightly above her shoulders, as if even the air around her moved differently. The whispers called her a vampire, but not in the way humans understood. She did not feed on blood. She fed on energy, the life force of nearby beings, they said. Most species could not survive more than a few minutes in her presence. The warnings, the fear, the whispers, it all made sense now. Elias, however, felt something unexpected. Not fear, not panic, not even curiosity in the way a human usually felt when confronted with danger. Instead, there was calm. A strange, calm clarity that made him take a step forward. He could feel the eyes of the room on him, burning in silent accusation. Other humans had been warned, and they obeyed. Other species obeyed out of instinct. But Elias walked straight to the empty chair next to her and sat down. The moment he did, the room seemed to hold its breath. Aliens turned to look at him, faces twisted in disbelief and concern. The station fell unusually quiet for a moment, the usual hum of conversation stilled by collective anticipation. People expected her to react, to lash out, to do something terrible. But she didn't. She looked at him, studied him, and then, surprisingly, offered the faintest inclination of her head. A silent acknowledgement, almost like a greeting. "Hello," she said, her voice soft, melodic, but carrying weight. It was the first human word she had spoken in centuries, or so the rumors claimed. Elias blinked, unsure if he had expected a growl or a hiss, but certainly not a simple greeting. "Hi," he replied, keeping his tone light, friendly. "I'm Elias. I didn't mean to, I didn't know I was supposed to avoid you." Usually he would have stayed quiet, blended into the background, obeyed the warnings. Yet here he was, sitting calmly beside someone who had been labeled a monster by everyone else. Around them, the whispers grew louder, but Elias barely noticed. He focused on her, trying to detect any sign of aggression. There was none. She was calm, composed, almost serene in a way that defied the warnings he had received. "You are not afraid," she observed. It was not a question, but a statement that hung in the air, heavier than anything else. Her eyes studied him, penetrating, yet not hostile. "Why? You haven't hurt anyone, right? You're just sitting here." "I mean, I'm just me." "That is new." The other aliens, the judgment, the rumors, they all faded into the background. For the first time, he was focused entirely on her, not out of curiosity or bravado, but something simpler, understanding. A desire to understand a being so feared and so lonely. "You are not like the others," she said again, almost softly this time, as if repeating a thought she had tried to articulate for years. "I did not expect anyone to sit with me. I expected you to run, scream, or collapse." For a moment, Elias felt a strange sensation, a tugging at the edges of his awareness, but it was not harmful. It was curious, almost investigative, like she was trying to measure him, understand him. And he realized something extraordinary. The warnings had been wrong, at least in part. He was alive. He was fine. And she had not harmed him in any way. In fact, she seemed intrigued. "You are alive," she said, more to herself than to him. "And unharmed, fascinating. Or perhaps, you are the first human in centuries who can sit beside me and remain unaffected." It was strange to be so close to someone considered dangerous and yet feel safe. The stories of her being a predator were everywhere, but here she sat quietly, calm, and in control. The contradiction was mesmerizing. Elias wondered how long she had waited for this, someone who did not run, someone who did not fear. You are different, Sarathiel said again, almost reluctantly. And I do not know why I find that comforting. The effect was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Elias felt it. He felt the quiet energy of her presence, not as a threat, but as something he could hold, something he could meet halfway. In a universe that had taught every species to fear her, he was the first to respond with calm instead of panic. Around them, whispers continued, but Elias no longer cared. For the first time, he understood the stories were exaggerated. They were warnings born of fear, misunderstanding, and centuries of myth-making, but fear was not universal. Fear could be challenged. And here, sitting beside Sarathiel, he realized that humans were different. Humans could be strong in ways others were not. Humans could endure. Humans could resist. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. Elias learned small things about her, the way she observed life around the station, her habits, the faint tremor in her voice when she spoke about being alone. She had lived for centuries, yet she had never spoken freely with anyone. Humans, he realized, were unpredictable. That unpredictability was perhaps the one thing in the galaxy that could reach her without harm. As the station lights shifted toward evening, Elias stood. "I should probably get going," he said, "but thanks for sitting with me." That is noteworthy. For the first time in centuries, Sarathiel felt a spark she had not known in herself. Curiosity, respect, and maybe something that edged toward hope. And she realized, watching Elias disappear into the station corridor, that perhaps this human would not run. Perhaps this human would not fear. Perhaps this human was different. And that difference would matter. The following day, the station was alive with murmurs about Elias and the alien woman, Sarathiel. Whispers followed him through corridors, across lounges, even into the dining halls. Most aliens kept their distance, eyes darting toward him as if he carried a contagious misfortune. The Virelian woman, so he had learned her species was called, had become a legend overnight. Elias found it amusing. Legends were usually false, myths exaggerated, yet for once he could see why the stories existed. Sarathiel was unlike anything anyone had ever encountered, and humans, it seemed, were the only species capable of tolerating her presence. Despite the warnings, Elias returned to the common area the next morning. He wanted answers, not thrills. Curiosity had taken root overnight, stronger than fear or hesitation. When he entered, Sarathiel was already there, seated in the same chair, her gaze following the movement of a hovering tray. Her eyes lifted, silver glimmering faintly in the soft light, and for a moment neither spoke. Elias noticed the subtle tension in the room. Other species lingered at the edges, as if they might faint or react violently if he stayed too long. But the humans, well, there were few humans on the station, and they avoided the corner entirely. Fear was contagious, yet Elias had never been so unafraid. "You return," she said quietly, the words almost a whisper, though they carried the weight of centuries. "Curious or foolish?" "The truth is rarely safe," she said. "Most species cannot endure the truth of me. They panic, they collapse, or they flee. You do not. That is unusual." That difference had made him sit when others ran. Around them, the whispers grew louder, though Elias tried not to notice. Other species circled like wary predators. A group of Aelorians, a thin, bird-like race, muttered under their breath. "He will not survive," one said. Another shook its head. Human arrogance will cost him dearly. Elias had learned enough about station culture to know that warnings were rarely idle. Yet here he was, seated calmly beside a being that frightened the galaxy. "Tell me," he said, "what happens if I stay? What's supposed to happen to humans?" He tried to sound casual, but a part of him wanted the answer straight. Sarathiel studied him, her hands resting on the table. "Nothing catastrophic, yet it is disorienting. My resonance is subtle, yet it influences others. Most species are unstable in my presence. Humans are different. Your body does not falter. Your mind does not collapse. You ground me without intending to. That is new." "You mean like, stop you from hurting anyone?" Perhaps it was his natural curiosity. Perhaps it was a subtle human resilience that had evolved over millennia. Whatever the reason, he realized that he was already part of something no one else could touch. A connection built not on strength or dominance, but on presence and understanding. "You are not afraid," Sarathiel said again, almost softly, as though confirming the observation for herself. "And that unsettles me. Humans are different, perhaps the only species that can truly withstand me." For a moment she seemed almost vulnerable, a glimpse of the being behind the myth. "Few have ever spoken that truth to me," she said. "Most fear the truth not just of me, but of themselves." He noticed details that others ignored. The faint tremor of her fingers as she adjusted her posture, the tiny shimmer of light across her skin, the way her eyes seemed to map every movement in the room without a single muscle betraying intent. She was dangerous, or at least, she had the power to be, but danger was not the same as threat. Elias understood that even if the galaxy did not. As the day progressed, he observed more. Sarathiel did not feed as rumors suggested. She seemed to absorb nothing deliberately. Instead, there was a subtle presence and energy that radiated outward, felt only when close. Aliens nearby recoiled. Some faltered in speech. Others visibly weakened, retreating with urgent whispers to anyone who would listen. But Elias, he remained unaffected. If anything, he felt a quiet focus, a clarity, as if sitting beside her sharpened his awareness instead of dulling it. Curiosity mingled with caution. Elias wondered how much of her power was instinctive, how much was conscious restraint. He dared not ask directly, knowing the answer could be dangerous or revealing in ways he was not ready to face. Instead, he tried to understand through observation, an approach humans had perfected over millennia. Observe first. Judge later. That was his way. Hours passed. Station personnel came and went, some stopping briefly to warn him again. "Do not linger near her," one officer said. "It is unsafe." Elias nodded politely, ignoring the fear. It had become background noise. He realized something important. Humans had an ability other species lacked. They could face fear without succumbing to it. They could endure, adapt, and resist. That endurance, he suspected, was what made Sarathiel so intrigued. She had known fear for centuries, yet here in his calm presence she was met with something entirely different. "You persist," she said quietly, almost with admiration. "Do you not fear consequences?" "That is dangerous, yet fascinating." She was testing him, perhaps, sensing whether he could endure, whether he could survive in ways others could not. And he realized that he wanted to pass that test, not for glory, not for attention, but simply because he wanted to understand her. The curiosity was genuine, mutual, a rare alignment of intent. Then a commotion arose. A group of alien traders, a mix of tall, insected species, approached the area. Their voices were loud, harsh. They saw Sarathiel and recoiled, whispering warnings to each other. One of them, a towering insected with metallic wings, snapped, "Why is he here? You know the rule, you know what she does." She did not flinch, did not react violently, did not even shift her posture. Instead, she observed the traders, her eyes sharp, assessing, calculating. Elias realized something in that moment. She had endured centuries of fear, suspicion, and hostility. Humans in their brief lifetimes could resist fear. She had endured eternity, and now their paths had crossed. The trader approached Elias, antennae twitching nervously. "You must leave. Humans cannot survive long here." His tone was urgent, bordering on pleading. "It is dangerous. She can take more than you imagine." Elias and Sarathiel were alone again, the room gradually returning to its usual hum. The brief incident was a reminder. The galaxy feared her, and yet here he was unaffected. Humans were different. Humans endured. Humans resisted. And that difference was more remarkable than any weapon or technology he had encountered. As the day ended, Elias finally rose to leave. He felt a quiet satisfaction. Not triumph, not arrogance, but a deep understanding. He had observed her, endured her presence, and remained calm. He had learned something the galaxy had forgotten. Fear could be challenged. Myths could be met with reason. Presence, trust, and calm could be more powerful than panic, aggression, or weapons. Sarathiel watched him go, a faint glimmer of curiosity lingering in her eyes. Elias had passed the first test, not with power, but with patience and presence. And for her, the centuries of isolation had begun to feel slightly less absolute. Perhaps this human would endure the next challenges. Perhaps this human would continue to sit beside her when no one else could. In the quiet of the evening, as station lights dimmed and aliens returned to their quarters, Sarathiel reflected on what had occurred. She had been alone for centuries, feared, isolated, and yet here was a human who neither fled nor panicked. That simple act, sitting beside her calmly, had done more than anyone else ever could. It had sparked something unfamiliar, hope, trust, and the faintest trace of companionship. Humans were strange, unpredictable, and unyielding, and in that strangeness lay their power. Elias, walking through the corridor toward his quarters, felt a quiet pride, not the kind that comes from winning a battle or defeating a foe, but the kind that comes from standing calmly where others would flee. Humans, he realized, had something unique. They could face fear and remain human, undisturbed. They could challenge myths, break rules, and endure the unimaginable. That endurance, he suspected, was why he had survived sitting beside her, and why he would return tomorrow. The galaxy might never understand the strength of humanity, but Elias did. And Sarathiel, perhaps she would learn soon enough. The next morning, Elias returned to the common area of Andara Station with a quiet determination. He had spent the night thinking about Sarathiel, about the strange calm that had settled over him while he was near her, and about the way other species had reacted. The whispers hadn't stopped. In fact, they had multiplied, threading through the corridors like invisible currents of fear. Yet Elias did not waver. Humans were made for persistence, for enduring what others could not. He had endured the gaze of the station, the whispers, the fear, and now he would face what might be the most important moment of his encounter with Sarathiel. When he entered the room, she was already seated as she always was, her posture regal and composed. Her eyes lifted to meet his, silver glimmering faintly under the soft lights. Elias could feel the subtle pulse of her presence again, not a threat, but something he could sense, a low vibration that seemed to brush against his awareness. It was disorienting, but not harmful. He understood now that other species were not lying, they were simply unprepared to endure it. Humans, he realized, were different. They could endure, adapt, and even stabilize a situation others found unbearable. "You return," she said, her voice calm, melodic, yet carrying weight. Persistent. "I want to know the truth about you, not the stories. We can face fear and not let it control us. We notice things others ignore, we stay calm when panic spreads. Maybe that's why I'm here." "That surprises me. You are not to interact with anyone without supervision. And you, human, must leave immediately. Humans are fragile. You may survive this once, but it is not guaranteed. Your warnings are unnecessary." And he realized that this was the first true test of humans' unique resilience. One of the officers, braver than the rest, stepped closer. "You must leave, human," he said. "It is forbidden, the risks." "I am here, and I will remain here." Sarathiel inclined her head slightly. "You have passed the first trial," she said softly. "Not by strength, but by endurance, not by force, but by presence. Humans are remarkable in ways I did not expect." "Maybe that's enough." The officers, realizing they were not going to force him to leave, eventually withdrew, muttering warnings to each other. The whispers in the room continued, but Elias no longer noticed. He was focused entirely on Sarathiel. She, in turn, seemed equally focused on him. There was a quiet understanding forming between them, one that transcended species, history, and myth. "You understand," she said finally, "that my presence affects all differently. Most cannot endure, most cannot tolerate me. Humans, you are rare. Perhaps humans are the only species capable of sitting beside me without fear. Perhaps humans are the only ones who can stabilize me." Her words were quiet, almost reflective, as if she had not spoken them to anyone in centuries. Elias realized the weight of her words. Humans were not just surviving, they were changing her experience of existence. They were redefining the rules the galaxy had lived by for centuries. Then came another test. A trader from a distant system known for boldness and recklessness entered the common area. He had heard of Sarathiel's presence and the human who dared sit beside her. His species, tall and serpentine, moved with arrogance. "Human," he hissed, "you do not know what you face. That creature, she is not to be trifled with. You may survive today, but tomorrow." Humans reacted differently. They assessed, they chose, they endured. That simple difference unsettled not just the trader, but everyone observing. Sarathiel's gaze softened, her presence brushing against Elias in a way that was almost protective. "You are not like the others," she said. "Your resilience, it is unexpected, and yet necessary. I guess humans have a lot to offer. Sometimes it's not strength or weapons, it's just enduring, facing fear, standing when others flee, observing when others panic." Other species saw fragility. They underestimated the power of endurance, the subtle strength in calm, and the quiet force of presence. Yet here he was, proving them wrong. As the day continued, Elias and Sarathiel remained seated together. He observed her more closely than ever, noting subtle shifts in expression, tiny changes in posture, and the faint shimmer that radiated from her skin. She did not feed, she did not attack, she did not harm, she simply existed. And humans, he realized, could exist beside her without collapsing. That was remarkable. That was HFY in its purest form, the simple strength of humanity, unyielding in the face of what others feared. By mid-afternoon, the whispers in the station had grown into stories. "The human who sits beside the Virelian woman," some said. "The one who endures where others fail." Elias ignored them, focusing instead on Sarathiel. He wanted to understand her, to see beyond the myths and legends. Humans were curious by nature. It was not bravery alone, it was the desire to comprehend, to connect, to persist. Sarathiel, too, seemed engaged in a quiet reflection. She had lived for centuries, feared by countless species, isolated and misunderstood. Yet here was a human who neither fled nor panicked. His presence was stabilizing, his calm was disarming, his endurance was extraordinary. She realized with a faint spark of hope that perhaps humans could do what no other species could, meet her without fear and perhaps even change the way she existed. The sun-like lights of the station shifted toward evening. The corridors filled with travelers returning to their quarters, and yet Elias remained beside her. He had learned something vital. Humans were more than myths. They were resilient, adaptive, and capable of withstanding what others could not. His presence had not only proven that humans could endure, but that their endurance could affect even beings who had survived centuries of isolation and fear. Sarathiel spoke quietly as the room began to empty. "You have passed the next test," she said. "Not by force, not by aggression, but by choice, by endurance, by presence. Humans are remarkable. Humans were not the strongest species, nor the fastest. But in their calm, their curiosity, and their endurance, they were capable of feats no one had anticipated. Elias had proven that today, and Sarathiel had witnessed it. As Elias finally rose to leave, he felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. Not triumph over fear, not victory over others, but the understanding that humans had a power the galaxy had overlooked. They could endure, they could stabilize, they could face what others feared and survive. That power, subtle but profound, was enough to change perspectives, rewrite myths, and perhaps alter the course of history. Sarathiel watched him go, silver eyes glimmering with something akin to hope. Elias had passed not just the trial of presence, but the first test of understanding. He had faced whispers, fear, and legend itself, and had endured. And in doing so, he had demonstrated something the galaxy had long forgotten. That sometimes the strength of humanity lay not in weapons, not in aggression, but in the quiet power of endurance. The day began quietly on Andara Station, but Elias sensed a tension in the air that had not been present before. Something was different. The usual hum of the station, the chatter of countless species, and the occasional clatter of hovering carts seemed muted, as if the entire station held its breath. He had grown used to the subtle energy around Sarathiel, the faint pull of her presence that unsettled most beings but left him calm. Today, however, it felt sharper, almost urgent, as though something unseen had shifted. He found her in the usual corner of the common area, seated with her hands folded neatly. Her eyes flicked toward him as he approached, silver glimmering faintly, and for a moment, Elias felt that familiar pull of her presence brushing against his awareness. He remained calm, observing, waiting for the explanation he sensed was coming. Other species in the room avoided her, maintaining distance, whispers trailing behind them like shadows. He noticed that even some of the most experienced station personnel looked uneasy. Elias realized something significant was about to happen. Before he could speak, the alarm sounded. Red lights flashed across the hallways, accompanied by a deep, resonating tone that vibrated through the walls. An announcement echoed in multiple languages. "Emergency! Containment breach in sector. See all personnel and civilians to proceed to safe zones immediately." Panic rippled through the crowd. Aliens scattered, some running toward exits, others freezing in place. The usual chaos of the station erupted as fear spread like wildfire. Elias felt Sarathiel's presence intensify beside him. Not threatening but heightened, like a storm gathering energy. She stood gracefully, moving with a fluidity that drew attention despite the chaos. Her silver eyes scanned the room, analyzing, calculating, controlling. Many species faltered, overwhelmed by her presence, their energy weakened by instinctive fear. Elias, as always, remained unaffected. Instead of feeling the pull, he felt a strange sense of clarity. Humans could endure, humans could face fear and remain calm, and in that calm they could stabilize others. "What is happening?" Elias asked, his voice steady despite the chaos. "The situation is critical," Sarathiel replied. "A rogue faction has infiltrated the station. They intend to exploit me to use my resonance as a weapon. Most species will collapse under the effects. You are unaffected. That is why you are here. We prevent them from harming anyone. And I'll stay with you." Elias followed Sarathiel as she moved, guiding him through the crowd, her presence subtly manipulating the energy around her. Where she passed, aliens faltered or froze, overcome by instinctive fear. Where Elias passed, the effect was different. He remained calm, his energy grounded, and those nearby who glimpsed him felt a strange reassurance. Some stabilized, some slowed their panicked retreat, simply enough to avoid immediate danger. The first encounter with the rogue faction came unexpectedly. A small group of humanoid aliens attempted to force their way toward Sarathiel, intending to harness her power directly. As they neared, Elias observed the subtle changes in her resonance. Normally, it would overwhelm most beings within seconds. Today, however, Elias' calm presence moderated it. He stood beside her, a human anchor amidst the storm of fear and energy. The rogues faltered, unsteady, unable to act with precision as their instincts betrayed them. "Stay close," Sarathiel said. "They will try to exploit instinct. They expect panic. That is their mistake." He felt the faint tremor of her energy brushing against him, not harmful but alive, probing. Humans, she had said, were unique in their ability to endure. Today, that uniqueness mattered more than ever. Humans could resist instinctive fear, and in doing so, they could stabilize even a being as powerful as Sarathiel. The first rogue faltered, collapsing to the floor as the subtle pressure of her resonance intensified. Others paused, confusion and terror in their eyes. Elias took a careful step forward, projecting calm, maintaining his focus, and somehow the effect spread. Aliens around him felt steadiness where before there had been panic. They could act, flee rationally, or assist the wounded without succumbing to instinctive collapse. Sarathiel moved with fluid grace, directing her energy strategically, her presence a shield rather than a weapon. "You see," she said quietly to Elias, "your calm, it anchors me. Without it, the station would already be lost. Humans endure where others fail." He had never felt more alive. Humans had always adapted, always persisted, and today that endurance was not just abstract. It was tangible, observable, crucial. With every step, he reinforced the stability of Sarathiel's resonance, countering the panic around them, giving the terrified station occupants a chance to survive. The rogue faction regrouped, realizing their initial plan had failed. They activated energy amplifiers intended to boost Sarathiel's resonance forcibly. Panic spread through the area again, but Elias stood his ground. He faced them calmly, observing, assessing, choosing each movement and word with intention. Sarathiel followed his lead, her energy now coordinated with his presence. Where panic had dominated, clarity began to emerge. Where fear had threatened to collapse the station, calm resilience began to spread. Together, they advanced toward the central hub, Elias anchoring the chaos with quiet determination, Sarathiel guiding her energy with precision. Each rogue encountered was disarmed or incapacitated, not through violence alone, but through the unique combination of her power and his human endurance. Aliens nearby regained composure, able to act instead of fleeing because Elias remained steady, their instincts subtly influenced by his calm. Finally, they reached the control chamber of the station. The rogue faction attempted a last desperate maneuver, their amplifiers ready. Sarathiel stepped forward, energy radiating subtly, Elias beside her, human calm anchoring the effects. "Stop," he said simply, projecting clarity, not fear. His presence resonated through the chamber, countering the amplified resonance and stabilizing the environment. The rogues faltered, unable to maintain focus or control. Their plan unraveled in seconds. Sarathiel's presence, tempered by human calm, neutralized the threat. The rogue faction retreated, defeated not by brute force, but by the unique combination of endurance and controlled resonance. The station slowly settled, the alarms ceasing, the lights returning to normal. Aliens looked around in awe and relief. For the first time, many witnessed a human not just surviving, but stabilizing an entire situation that had seemed doomed to disaster. Elias turned to Sarathiel. "It's over," he said quietly. "You're safe, everyone's safe." Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the fastest, nor the most aggressive. But in endurance, in calm, in the ability to face fear without panic, they had power that others could not comprehend. Today, that power had saved hundreds of lives, perhaps more. And for Sarathiel, it had changed centuries of isolation and fear into something new: trust, stability, and hope. The aftermath was quiet but profound. Station personnel checked for damages and ensured all species were accounted for. Whispers about the human who sat beside the Virelian woman spread quickly, carrying not fear but awe. Elias had demonstrated that humans were more than myths. They could endure. They could stabilize. They could face what others feared and remain calm, a subtle power that no weapon could replicate. Sarathiel remained seated beside him, her presence calm now, almost contemplative. "You are remarkable," she said softly. "Humans endure where others collapse. Humans face fear without yielding. Today, you proved it. I guess humans do things differently. We sit when others run. We endure when others collapse. And sometimes that's enough to make a difference." Elias had proven it today, not through force, not through aggression, but through calm endurance, clear thought, and steady presence. As evening fell over the station, the lights dimming to soft gold, Sarathiel spoke again. "Today, centuries of fear were challenged. Not by power, not by violence, but by presence. You, human, and your species are extraordinary. Perhaps the galaxy has underestimated what it means to endure." For the first time in centuries, she felt a spark she had not known: hope, trust, and the faintest sense of companionship. Humans were strange, unpredictable, unyielding, and entirely extraordinary. And today they had saved a station, perhaps changing perspectives, myths, and the understanding of resilience across the galaxy. The station was quiet the next morning, though the echoes of yesterday's chaos still lingered in the corridors. Andara Station had survived thanks to Elias and Sarathiel, yet the tension remained. Aliens whispered in hushed tones, recounting what they had seen, replaying the events of the emergency again and again. The rogue faction had been defeated, their technology dismantled, and the station restored. But more than that, something subtle had changed. The perception of humans had shifted. Where once they were dismissed as fragile or insignificant, now their endurance, their presence, and their calm had been witnessed firsthand. Humans had saved the day without weapons, without aggression, and without fear. Elias walked through the corridors with a quiet sense of purpose. He had not expected recognition, but the subtle nods and glances from species who had once ignored him told him something important. Humans had been seen. Humans had been respected. And perhaps, just perhaps, they were beginning to be understood. He found Sarathiel in her usual corner of the common area, seated as if time itself had slowed around her. Her silver eyes lifted toward him, glimmering softly in the gentle light. There was a faint warmth in her expression, a subtle shift that suggested trust and perhaps even admiration. For the first time in centuries, she seemed at ease, not because of her own power, but because of the human beside her. "You returned," she said softly. "I did not expect it. Yet I am glad you did. Humans, you chose differently. That is extraordinary. You stabilized me, and through that, the station. Others would have fallen, you did not. Sometimes it's not about fighting. It's about being steady when others can't." "Humans are fascinating," Sarathiel said quietly. "Your species, your presence, it challenges the understanding I have held of all other life. You endure, you resist instinctive fear, and in doing so you stabilize. That is remarkable." Humans had been dismissed, underestimated, and misunderstood for generations. Yet here they were, capable of influencing the galaxy in subtle but profound ways. Their endurance, their calm, their ability to face fear without succumbing had changed the course of events, and it had earned him Sarathiel's recognition, trust, and something like companionship. Around the station, life began to return to normal. Aliens cautiously emerged from their hiding spots, returning to their routines while exchanging whispered conversations about the human who had sat beside the Virelian woman. Elias noticed the subtle change in their behavior. Respect replaced fear, curiosity replaced suspicion. Humans had not conquered through violence, but they had earned recognition through the quiet power of endurance. Sarathiel stood slowly, moving beside him. "There will be challenges ahead," she said. "Not all species will understand humans as I now do. Many will continue to fear, to misjudge, to avoid what they cannot comprehend. Yet you endure, you adapt, you stabilize. That is something no other species has done for me. The galaxy has begun to see humans differently. Others will learn slowly that endurance, calm, and presence can be powerful, that sometimes strength is not measured in weapons or dominance, but in the quiet ability to face fear without yielding." She paused, her eyes meeting his directly. "And perhaps we continue to understand each other. That is important." Humanity had proven that endurance and calm could stabilize even the most volatile beings, and that recognition of that strength could shift perception across species. He nodded slowly. "I understand. Humans endure, and maybe we can help others endure too. Not by fighting, but by being steady when others panic, by being calm when others fear, and by standing when others fall. And perhaps the galaxy has begun to understand that your species is extraordinary." And Elias, walking beside her, felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that humans had been recognized not for aggression, not for dominance, but for endurance. That was the essence of HFY, the quiet, often unnoticed strength that defined humanity across space and time. Sarathiel paused, looking out across the station, her silver eyes reflecting the gentle lights above. You are the first human who has not fled, who has not panicked, who has endured beside me. That is not only rare, it is history. Perhaps one day your species will continue to sit beside me, or others like me, without fear. Perhaps one day the galaxy will understand what humans truly are capable of. Humans were often dismissed as weak or fragile, but their endurance, their resilience, and their ability to face fear without succumbing had tangible effects. They could stabilize chaos, influence others subtly, and change perception without ever raising a weapon. That power, quiet but profound, was uniquely human. Around them, the station's inhabitants began to resume normal routines, though their whispers continued. Stories would spread, legends would form, and myths would adjust to reality. Humans had proven their worth not through violence, but through calm presence, observation, and endurance. Elias had become an example, a symbol of what humanity could achieve when they refused to yield to fear. Sarathiel turned toward him, her expression softening further. You are extraordinary, human, and your species may yet shape more than just this station. You endure, you stabilize, and you persist. That is strength beyond comprehension. That is humanity. He had proven that humans could face the unimaginable, remain calm, and influence even beings that had survived centuries of fear and isolation. That was the essence of what he had discovered, not just for himself, but for humanity. I guess humans do things differently, he said softly, almost to himself. We endure when others flee. We stand when others fall. We observe when others panic. And sometimes, that is enough to make a difference. The chaos of yesterday had been replaced by quiet order. Aliens moved with caution, respect, and newfound understanding. Humans had been recognized not for what they lacked, but for what they uniquely possessed: resilience, calm, and the ability to endure. That realization filled him with quiet pride, not arrogance, but the kind of pride that comes from knowing one has acted correctly in the face of fear, that one has endured when others could not, and that one has changed something subtle but profound in the world around them. As the day drew to a close, Sarathiel spoke one final time. You have endured, human. You have stabilized. You have persisted, and in doing so you have changed more than the station. You have changed me. Perhaps one day others will understand what humans truly are capable of. Perhaps one day your species will be seen as extraordinary in ways even I had not imagined. Humans were often underestimated, dismissed, or misunderstood. Yet today that had changed. He had endured, he had stabilized, he had persisted. And in doing so, he had not only influenced Sarathiel, but had set an example for the galaxy itself. The station lights dimmed softly, signaling the end of the day. The usual hum of interstellar activity resumed, now tinged with quiet respect and recognition. Elias stood beside Sarathiel, ready to continue forward, knowing that humanity had proven itself not through strength, aggression, or dominance, but through endurance, calm, and presence. And in that endurance, humans had achieved something remarkable: recognition, trust, and a subtle yet undeniable influence across the galaxy. For centuries, Sarathiel had been feared, isolated, and misunderstood. But with Elias, a human, she had experienced something new: presence without fear, calm without weakness, and endurance that changed everything. Humanity had proven its strength, not in power, but in resilience. And together, human and Virelian, they had begun to rewrite what the galaxy thought was possible. Elias looked at Sarathiel one last time before stepping toward the exit. Tomorrow, he said softly, we continue. Humans endure. And I will sit beside you again. And in the quiet aftermath, Elias realized something profound. Sometimes the greatest victories were not won with weapons, aggression, or fear, but with calm presence, steady endurance, and the courage to sit when everyone else fled. Humanity had proven its worth. Humanity had earned recognition, and the galaxy would never see them the same way again.